This series of videos is going to take you through how to graph logarithmic functions, both the regular logarithm and also the ln, which is the one with base e. First thing we want to take a look at, if we find the inverse of f of x equals a to the x, so we're just going to be switching x and y. So remember, when we find the inverse, we switch it. We're going to change that to log form. So therefore the inverse of this function is log base a of x. Now in reviewing an inverse, all we're doing is switching the x and the y. So we had our original general table, negative 1, 0, 1, 1 over a, 1 and a. If we just take the points and switch them, we're going to have 1 over a, negative 1, 1, 0, and a 0. So we're using the same exact table. I'm going to put ABC here because we are going to label our graphs with these later, and that's on a new screen. So we're using the same table, just flipping it. All the stuff we're going to do with transformations will be the same, just with this new table. A couple other things switch with the graphs that we want to look at as well. So we'll look at the visual of this next. Okay, so our general graph, we had a horizontal asymptote for the exponential. That also helped us with determining the range. Our domain was negative infinity to infinity. And then the y-intercept here was 0, 1. So when we switch the graph, now I'm just going to put these points in arbitrary spots because we don't know what a is. Obviously when we go to do the graphs, we will have an actual spot for that. Okay, now since we're switching everything, instead we're going to have a vertical asymptote, which is x equals 0. That's going to help us with determining the domain instead of the range. So the domain is going to be 0, comma, infinity. Since everything switches, the domain is going to become the range and be negative infinity to infinity. And then the x-intercept is going to switch over and become 1, 0, whereas before the y-intercept was 0, 1. Again, I'm going to put these points in kind of arbitrary spots here. When we actually have an a value, it'll be a little easier to show and label those points. Okay, before we get into the graphing, we do want to talk about, just refresh the transformations and talk about how to find the domain of the graphs. So we'll do that next on this video. Remember with the videos, if you need to pause to write anything down, you can do that. Now we do have the parentheses here. So this is going to be our translate left, translate up. So if you don't see the parentheses, then that means it's going to be up or down. And a lot of times they'll be all mixed together, so you'll be able to see the parentheses and what's outside. Just like always, the left and right are opposite what you would expect. And you'll see later if there aren't parentheses, it might be worth adding them. We have a reflect over the x-axis and a reflect over the y-axis. Again, we're not really going to look at the stretching on this, although we could. Okay, and the last piece of this video, so that doesn't go too far beyond 5 minutes, is how to find the domain without graphing, especially if it's one that we wouldn't want to graph. We're going to take the parentheses, and we're going to set it to be greater than 0. It's important with the domain. I'm just going to scroll back a page. If you look at this red line, our vertical asymptote, everything goes to the right of the vertical asymptote, or possibly the left if we have a reflection. So when we're doing domain, it has to be greater than 0. So we already kind of talked about this a little when we were solving an equation. We're just going to take the parentheses, put it to be greater than 0, solve it. In this case, x will be greater than -4/3. The only thing you have to be careful of is when you divide by a negative. So in this next one, although we have this as an ln, you can do the same thing. We'll do 5 minus 2x is greater than 0. So the -2x is greater than -5. I'm going to skip showing that step because the next step I want to highlight. You're going to divide by -2. Remember to switch the inequality sign. When you divide by that negative. So this will become x is less than 5/2. So that's the only tricky part of doing it this way. And this is something you can do at the beginning of graphing or at the end if it's something that you're going to be graphing to start with. The next video will take us through the whole graphing process.